Could everybody sit down? Good morning. My name is Pat Bonanni. I would like to thank Mother Barbara and you all for the privilege and the honor of speaking here today. The voice that I was born with has oftentimes led people to mistake my passion for anger. Many times over the years, I've jokingly said that I'm the most misunderstood man in America. I want to assure all of you here today that there is no anger in my words or my heart, but there's a passion especially for our veterans, the young men and women that are serving today, and my favorite veteran, the World War II veteran, who will be the main focus of what I have to say. What will be said today, I'll talk about some general issues with what I believe in veterans care, talk about some veterans in general, talk about a couple of generations of veterans. You know, all veterans they have their own generation. Every generation has their veterans. Mine happened to be the Vietnam era. My father's was World War II. And I'll have some criticisms about some of the veterans' treatments, although it's getting better. But those are criticisms with the hope that when we all hear about them again, maybe it'll trigger some of us or all of us to maybe step up and try to help do some things to make it better, although it is getting better. None of what I say today is anger or bitterness, but I do have a heart full of respect for the people of the United States and this constitutional republic. However, this respect is tinged with the sadness. No matter the good words or intentions that we've espoused throughout the years, we still continue to fail veterans, both active duty and those that have served, at many levels, especially these days in the follow-up care. As a nation, we fail to educate our youth. We fail to teach and memorialize the contributions of our military throughout the history. And it's my belief, especially, the biggest failure is our failure to teach these young men and women today the contributions made to our country by the World War II veteran. I stand here before you a Vietnam era veteran, 71 years old, and I guarantee you that I am not now, nor have I ever been special. But these veterans that I'll speak about today, they were special. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear the word "I" used a lot. It's used because much of what's being presented today comes from personal experience and opinions that I've developed over the past 40 years. All that I'd like to say about veterans today can't be said. There's not enough time to put everything in context. And if I don't speak about the Korean War veteran, that's not because I don't think much of them. That's a subject for another time, and there's a lot to be said about that. It's hard to determine what I want to speak about today, so what I thought I would do is just provide for you some experience, my own military experience, some opinions I have about the veterans care, and my experience with World War II veterans growing up. My hope today is that you all will get some information here that will allow you to think more about the veterans and maybe help us all hold this government accountable for what's going on. When the word veteran is said normally out in society, most folks think of a sports veteran. You know, Yadier Molina has been with the Cardinals since 2004. He's a veteran ball player. Ryan Zimmerman was with the Nationals since about 205, 26. So that's mostly what a lot of folks think of veterans. We have a military veteran. A military veteran is someone who has served in one of the branches of the U.S. military, has completed that service, and has been discharged under conditions other than a bad conduct discharge, which is a BCD, or a dishonorable discharge. We have the World War II veteran, and I have a special definition for them that I'm going to share at the end of this. So we have the Korean veteran. Affecting me, or in my generation, was a Vietnam veteran. There were two definitions for Vietnam veteran. Vietnam veteran, in that context, is someone who served in the military during the Vietnam War and served in a combat zone. A Vietnam era veteran is someone who served in the military during the Vietnam War and the Vietnam era, but never served in a combat zone. I am a Vietnam era veteran. I served in the United States Navy 3 years and 10 months on active duty. January 13th, 1967, which was a Friday the 13th, to November 13th, 1970, which was a Friday the 13th. I don't know what that means, that's just what it was. I served at the Naval Air Station in Guam, and I served aboard the USS Saratoga, which at the time was designated as an attack carrier. It was a CVA-60. Also serving with me was the love of my life, the woman who I met at 4 years old in my sandbox, the woman I started dating in the 7th grade, the woman who I called 2 weeks before I left boot camp and said, "Hey, I'm going to Guam, will you marry me?" And she married me on April 1st, 1967, 2 weeks before I left for Guam. She spent 16 months there with me, living like a rat. Now, Laura didn't want me to say that because she reminded me of how happy we were. And we were happy. But if any of you are interested in how to prepare Spam 5 or 6 different ways, or how to juice up a tuna noodle casserole, Laura can give you that information. The only thing that I ask is if you do that and you get that recipe, please don't invite me to dinner. Why do I mention my wife when I speak of my active duty service? Aside from the fact that I'm extremely proud of a 20-year-old young woman from Grove City, Pennsylvania, who I'm not even sure ever crossed the Pennsylvania line before, jumped on a plane, flew 8,000 miles to be with a homesick husband in an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, who at 21 years old gave birth to our first child and daughter at the U.S. Naval Hospital in Guam. Now, she didn't have a birth coach, and there were no Lamaze classes. When the time came, they threw me out of the room. So I spent my time in the waiting room, pacing the floor, chain smoking Camels and drinking bad coffee. Often forgotten are the loved ones who are actively serving. The wife or the husband that keeps the family together while the other's deployed. The wife or the husband, the spouse that lives with the active duty person in substandard off-base housing, living paycheck to paycheck, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the active duty sailor, Marine, soldier, airman, or Coast Guardsman's mother who sits at home. Those things haven't changed much over the years. And we also forget and overlook the challenges of the person at home that has to take care of that service man or woman when they come back. So much different than when they left. And that's especially true today. We all know that some of these kids are coming back today really hurting, really bad. My mom was one of thousands of mothers who were married to World War II veterans who had sons and daughters serving during the Vietnam War. My mother had 2 sons on active duty from January 67 through 1972. Thankfully for my mother, her sons, my brother John and I, both came home physically and mentally okay. The World War II veteran is my passion. My family's history began with the World War II veteran. So I'd like to share with you a story about my exposure to the World War II veterans as I grew up. Not because it's unique or special, but because the experience that I had growing up and my exposure to those veterans was the norm for most young men and women who grew up in that time, in the 50s and 60s. I was born in '48, son of a World War II Navy veteran. My father was a first-generation Italian who enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1942, served as a gunner's mate and ultimately a gun mount captain on a 40mm mount aboard the light cruiser USS Mobile. He participated in major battles in the Pacific, from the invasion of Tarawa to the Battle of the Philippines, the Battle of Leyte Gulf in '43, the takeback of Guam in '44, the kamikaze attacks, and the Battle of Okinawa in '45, which he told me was the most scared he ever was in his entire life. In the Battle of Midway, my father's ship, the light cruiser Mobile, was assigned to the task force to protect the Aleutian Islands. My Uncle Ray served in the North Atlantic. My Uncle Skinny fought at Anzio. Laura's Uncle July was in the Tank Corps. He was a tanker in New York, and his specialty was a flamethrower. And I can tell you, he was never the same when he got back. These World War II veterans were ordinary men. There were no big muscle Rambo type guys. These were just guys who went to war as young men and came back worn and damaged, that expected to go to work, make a living, and raise a family. These were hard-working, hard-drinking, smokers and gamblers. These were guys who didn't look the part, but I guarantee you when they needed to use their fists, they could. And they did. Almost every man I knew growing up had been in the war. Now I recognize that many were damaged in some way. Functional alcoholics, abusive, reclusive, fighting depression or something else. But in spite of everything, most kept going. They raised their families, and they built this great country. When I was growing up, I didn't think too deeply about it. I didn't have a real appreciation for what they did. Nobody made a big deal out of it. But in the late 50s, I used to wait up on Friday nights for my dad. He worked afternoon turn. He'd come home on Friday nights, make a pot of coffee, and he'd sit at the table smoking Lucky Strikes and drinking coffee and telling me some stories about some of the battles he was in. Mostly it was the Pacific. So all I knew about Japan and the Japanese is what I read in the war book stories, saw in the movies around that time, what I heard from my dad and other veterans. And I can tell you this, none of it was good. January '67, about 6 months before my 19th birthday, my two best buddies, Jerry and Benny, we joined the Navy. I went to Guam and then on to the Saratoga. They went on to other duty stations. My brother John wanted to quit school in '67 to join with us, but Mom wouldn't have that. So John joined in '68 after graduation, and he and I got to spend a tour on the Saratoga in 1969 to get to serve brother duty. This was a bad time for the veterans during the Vietnam War. Bad time in the country. As an enlisted man at that time, when you traveled, you had to wear your uniform. Some senior NCOs were exempt from that. But most of the grunts had to wear the uniform. The guys that had the worst were the Marines and the soldiers. They got the brunt of most of it when they went into the airports. It was a bad time. But we all got over it, and now the veterans, Vietnam veterans, they think a little bit more, treated a lot better. On Veterans Day, we come together to try to honor the veterans. After today, most times, everything goes in the background. What I hope today is that by pointing out some of the issues with veterans care, we have that maybe we as a people start coming together and holding this government accountable. Because what I believe is there is a bipartisan failure by this government, I don't care what party it is, to adequately address issues and problems we have with these veterans and take care of these kids. There's abuses in the past that I'll talk about. Now, we've gotten better, but we still have a long way to go. And I think as a nation, we need to hold this government accountable. I've experienced resistance by the government. Not personally, I've seen it. When I say experience, I've seen it because I never had a disability. But growing up in the 50s and 60s, I heard the term shell shock. That's what they talked about when World War II guys came back. Now they call it PTSD. But those guys didn't have any support system. It was a ashamed. They were ashamed to say that they had problems. So what you'd hear is, well, their nerves are bad. That's what it was. Government didn't do anything for them. Most of them went to work. Vietnam, Agent Orange. I watched them fight Agent Orange for years before the government finally admitted what they had known for years, that defoliant is something that kills vegetation the way it killed Agent Orange killed it. And you tell me it's okay to walk through it, breathe it every day? They finally gave in to that. More recently, Gulf War syndrome. They finally admitted what they were burning over there in those pits and those oil wells were poisoning our young men and women. Those were back those days. Things are getting better. But we still fail in the follow-up care of these young men and women. As kids come home, we give them legs and arms and things, but there's a lot more that needs to be done for them and their caretakers. We have to stay diligent in this, because I'm telling you, we as a nation, if we don't hold this government accountable for this current generation of veterans, they're going to be forgotten, just like the World War II veterans and some of the others. When these wars stop, when we stop running all over the world as policemen, these young men and women are still going to be suffering. We cannot lose sight of that fact. I'd like to share with you a couple of facts and opinions that I have. All active military are exposed to some level of risk. Flight deck of a carrier, deck of a Coast Guard cutter, training operations in the Marines and the Army, on the airfield. But the combat veteran, the one that's in combat, he's exposed to the highest level. He's the guy or lady or woman that someone's trying to hurt every day. And we should not ever lose sight of that. My opinion, even in today's world, there are no Democrats, Republicans, right-wing zealots, left-wing zealots, progressives, regressives, whatever, in a foxhole, on the deck of a carrier, in an Air Force bomber, on a Coast Guard cutter. They are all Americans serving their country. Now, they may have political opinions and their agenda, but when they're serving, they serve everybody. They serve this country. And that's been proven. Our military have served presidents who have been heroes themselves. Dwight David Eisenhower, I would say the greatest military commander ever. John F. Kennedy, who after his PT boat was blown out of the water with a broken back, was saving his crew. George H.W. Bush, shot down as a 21-year-old fighter pilot off of Chichijima. These were all heroes. Our military served them, without question. Our military, and every president in my lifetime up to Ronald Reagan has served. Lyndon Johnson served, Gerald Ford served, Jimmy Carter served. They all served. But our military's also served men who dodged the draft, I'll say it. That's just that simple. They served draft dodgers too. They didn't say, well, I'm not going to serve you. They served men who decided they didn't want to serve. And they also served men who didn't have an opportunity to serve. So our military serves without question. When they get out, John McCain's a prime example. John McCain sure went political when he got out. There's many more now. But when they were serving, they served without question. The last fact I'd like to say, and I wish I could coin this one myself, there are no atheists in a foxhole. You can talk to any veteran, especially a combat veteran. He's going to tell you a couple of things happened in that foxhole. And one of them was praying. They all prayed. As an opinion, no civilized society can survive without warriors. Just look at the absolute atrocities being perpetuated across the world. If you don't think we need warriors, just look at some of the countries that don't have them. Look what's happening. I know I'm living in the greatest country in the world. And in my opinion, the reason it is the greatest country in the world is because of the young men and women who have served over the years and continue to serve today. A big regret as a nation we fail to teach the undeniable fact, and this is an opinion, that the United States of America and their World War II veterans saved the civilized world. We saved it from Nazism, fascism, and Japanese imperialism. And I can tell you, without the heroic actions of the World War II veteran and the people then, instead of reading the Bible, today you would be reading Mein Kampf. Our nation's failure to recognize, teach, and memorialize the sacrifices of men and women of what Tom Brokaw termed the greatest generation, I see this as one of our nation's greatest failures. It's a travesty and a mistake that this nation will come to regret. Before I close with the definition of a World War II veteran, I'd like to share a couple of examples of bravery and heroism exhibited by World War II veterans. And I'll bet $1 to a donut that anybody under 50 never heard of this. Who among us or who among you knows of the courage of Colonel Jimmy Doolittle's pilots, who in April 1942 launched B-25 bombers off the deck of the USS aircraft carrier Hornet to complete a bombing raid on Tokyo? And they knew before they launched they weren't going to have enough gas to come back. If they made it through all the anti-aircraft fire and were able to drop their bombs, they were going to have enough gas to get back. They were told you're going to have to crash land to mainland China, maybe get to the Soviet Union, hope you find some friendlies, or ditch in the Pacific Ocean. Maybe somebody will pick you up. But these men still got in those planes and did their duty. How about the Rangers who climbed the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc? How about the men, the prisoners of war, and the death march from Bataan? The inhumane treatment perpetrated by the Japanese military on prisoners of war, men who did nothing more than surrender and were treated so horribly. In the 1980s, I started hanging around some of the VFW clubs, Legion clubs in Shippensburg, Newville, Western Pennsylvania, Grove City, Mercer, Newcastle. And I'd hear some stories about some of the club regulars. I was a young guy then. These old, unassuming, pot-bellied guys were the same guys, these club regulars, who landed in Normandy on D-Day, fought the Battle of the Bulge, and hit the beaches of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima. These old guys had experienced some of the most horrific circumstances and conditions known to man. And they came home with virtually no support other than a wife or a mother who built the country. When you looked at these guys, nobody'd ever believe it. Most of them never picked up a weight in their life, but these were men who saved the world. In conclusion, I've been looking for a long time to find a fitting definition of a World War II veteran. I finally found one that was written in a book titled With the Old Breed. The book was written by Private First Class E.B. Sledge. And I paraphrased, and E.B. wrote the definition of a Marine veteran. I paraphrased his definition to reflect for me what I would consider a World War II veteran. It goes like this. A World War II veteran is a man who suffered so much for country. None came out unscathed. And they did their duty. Many gave their lives, many their health, some their sanity. All who survived will long remember the horror they would rather forget. But they suffered, did their duty, so a sheltered homeland could enjoy the peace that was purchased at such a high cost. We owe these veterans a profound debt of gratitude. God bless the United States of America and the men and women who have and who are now proudly serving. Thank you.